create some space for yourself. I need you to just do one little exercise with me. All right, so I've got a chair up here, so I'm going to ask everyone on the count of 3 to just get up. 1, 2, 3. And when you're done, sit down and just stomp your feet. That's it. So on the count of 3. Okay, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I promised Bias that when I start, I'm going to have people sitting at the edge of their chair, bouncing up and down, really excited to hear me, and stomping their feet. So thank you, everybody. So there's actually two reasons for doing that. And the first is, there were a number of people in the room who thought, stuff this, I'm not going to do it. There were a number of people who diligently obeyed the rules. And there were some that were confused and out of tune and didn't quite know what was going on. And that's essentially the story that I'm going to portray today for you. I didn't know Safe was going to be here, and I had a couple of Safe jokes. So I'm not sure if I can make them. But I'm going to make them anyway, okay? It's a safe space. So essentially, our journey began in sort of 2018. At the JSC. And at the time, we were landing a massive project. It was quite a difficult time for transformation in the organization. And what alleviated some of that was that in 2019, we sort of, late 2018, early 2019, we onboarded IQ to help us. And in this whole transition, there was a couple of challenges, and those challenges you could actually see in the room today. We tried to go big bang with a number of things. We anticipated that people would follow the rules. We anticipated that everybody would stand up, sit down, stomp their feet, on cue, unlike this room. But it didn't happen. And what that showed us was that there was a really uncoordinated effort in terms of our approach to managing our portfolio. And so that curve at the bottom that goes to the top was basically, it represents our maturity curve. And I made a joke earlier, and I'll probably make it again now, is that our maturity curve kind of reminded us about the 12-step program. And the first step of the 12-step program is understand that you have a problem. And when you don't understand you have a problem and you don't admit that you have a problem, you're not going to be able to fix the problem. And portfolio management was certainly a big problem for us. In 2019, and I'll show you some stats a little later, we tried to do a big bang lean portfolio management session, an LPM session, with the aid and support of some of the IQ guys today. And we tried to sequence 265 projects. Now let that just sink in for a second. 265 projects. When we started that, Bias had hair. And yeah, it's us. We take all the blame for that. But when you quickly realize, and there's a lot of things that we need to be cognizant of, is making your work visible, understanding what it is that you want to sequence, looking at all of those things, we quickly realized that we had a problem. Not that there was 265 things that we needed to do, but that we had an organizational problem. We had people who were screaming loud. There were people asking for money for pieces of work that they really couldn't add some value to. There was no strategic intent in terms of them understanding why they needed to do what they needed to do. So there was a lot of building blocks that we needed to put in place. And some of these building blocks were actually put in place quite neatly until this ugly little thing happened in 2020 called COVID. And we basically had to now go into a remote working situation, which made this even more complicated. You know, we had just gone, and I think all of the stationery shops around Sandton were very happy with us because we bought whiteboards and stickies, and we went big bang. We were there, right? We even learned how to pull the sticky off properly without it falling down, but that all came to a complete halt. And so we had to now figure out how do we do this in this space. And so in 2020, we had our first online lean portfolio management session. So there were two problems with that session. The first was we invited close to about 85 people onto a Teams call. The second problem was it was during Ramadan, I was fasting, and hence I didn't need any coffee or lunch breaks. So there was a lot of people that were really annoyed with me. And reading the room was really important at the time. But what we had quickly learned is that in order to sequence work, we needed to categorize things. And it sounds really elementary. It sounds, but why didn't you do that from the beginning? There were categories, but those categories were 15 years old, were 20 years old. And so we had to rethink about how we link our strategy and our execution and create this seamless flow of ideas that can go from ideation to completion. And so in 2020, there was a lot of heavy lifting, significant amount of heavy lifting. We did all of the safe stuff. We did all of the Kanban stuff, and thanks to Berto for supporting us with some of the work there. Work was visible. COPs were off to a great start, but again, we bit off a lot more than we could chew. 2020 was actually a very, very difficult year for us, not just because of COVID, but because of our own ambitions. And when we reflect back on that, there are things we can do differently, but we're happy we did the things we did because they taught us the lessons that we needed to learn right now. Over to 2021, what had happened was we took some of those lessons and started streamlining things. So the ships at the bottom, the S1s, S2s, is kind of where we started thinking about how do we streamline the process. You know, we all talk about continuous improvement, and it exists in some way, shape, or form for all of us, but we needed to streamline this process and make sure that it was not just well understood by everyone in the organization, but that we also could stick our hands up and support the process. Now, in everything that we've done in these first couple of years, the biggest obstacle wasn't that there weren't processes that existed or that there wasn't a structured framework that we could refer to. The biggest problem we had was people. And people have different perspectives. They operate at different speeds. When I said 1, 2, 3, let's all do our little chair squats, some people were doing their own thing. Others didn't care about doing it. Others were like, this guy's dodgy, I don't know what he's up to. And that's essentially what happened in our organization. There was a lot of apprehension towards going into a new direction. And that was our biggest problem. Our biggest problem wasn't that we needed to sequence work and that there was a framework that supported us and that we had all of these other processes around us. Our biggest problem was cultural and behavioral attributes that needed to change and shift with us. So what had happened was we started introducing a couple of not so agile things, and it made some of the agilists in the organization sit up and say, but hey, where did you get this from? And which book did you read this from? And this doesn't exist in SAFE, and this isn't what we were taught when we did our SPC. Forgive me for calling out SPCs, but there was a lot of questions around the things we did. And another lesson we took out of this was fit for purpose, fit for use. We can't cookie cut approach to everything. There isn't a one recipe that's going to fix the world's problems. And so we had to reinvent the way we did things in the past. We're doing them exactly the same, but we had to unlearn some things, relearn some things, and probably reinvent a whole bunch of other processes that supported us. And so there's language on here that probably doesn't make sense to a lot of folks, but we started understanding that in order to manage a portfolio and create a book of work, that's the celebration, that's the party. We need to prepare for the party. And so we had to do a lot of groundwork up front. And that groundwork up front was actually going and speaking to divisions and helping them to craft things like business cases. Don't be scared, not a bad word. Craft proper business cases. Understand what is the return. Link it to a particular strategy. make sure that the intent for why you want to do something is not just understood by the people who need to do it, but by the broader organization who need to contend for the same funds and people who need to execute on these things. So we instituted divisional synchronization sessions where we would meet, and up to today we still do them. In fact, there's 3 happening today that I can't attend. But we meet with divisions on a monthly basis to understand what is in your backlog. I don't want to sit with a 265 item backlog again. So let's understand on an ongoing, iterative way what is in your backlog. And how can we support you through all of the other mechanisms that exist in the organization, because people like architecture need to be involved. Sadly, people like finance also need to be involved. And so we need to bring all of these people along on the journey to understand the intent of that business case and to understand its value. And once it's understood, we can then get to a point where we say, is this something that we really want to do? And I'm reminded about something one of the colleagues in the room said. We had to have a lot of Spice Girl moments. And we had to ask, is this what you want, what you really, really want? Now, I wasn't going to sing it. It's about dancing. But essentially, that's what it boils down to, is that when you're managing a portfolio, a lot of organizations don't die from starvation. And just follow me for a second. They die from indigestion. You cannot digest 265 projects in any organization at any size. So understand what it is that you're going to do. There's a plethora of ideas. Nobody is short of ideas in any company that all of us represent here today. But pushing all of those ideas through a pipeline and expecting the flow that was spoken about earlier and the visibility that was spoken about earlier, it's not going to happen. So we needed to put up some guardrails. And again, not favorite words for a lot of people, but what we had to do was synchronize the organization. Now, a lot of people don't know, but the JSE is not the size of a Nedbank or an ABSA or Merrill Lynch. It's pretty small. And so it's really easy to mobilize 400 people to go in the same direction. But you need to synchronize this, and you need to make sure that everybody understands what is number 1 that we're working on, what is number 2 that we're working on, and if I'm not working on number 1 and number 2, where does my energy go to? And those are the things, basic things. I'm not talking about rocket science here. We had to help devs and BAs understand what is important for them and where they must go to. Because let's face it, we've all worked in organizations where there's a sequence of how we do things, there's a priority of how we do things, but then there's this little pet project that some exec has that comes at the end of somebody's desk and is really, really important. And it's very, very key that we do that. It never says that it's on his KPAs or KRAs and that it's on his scorecard, but it's really important that we do this because it's going to add value to the organization. And so those are the cultural, behavioral things that we had to shift and change. Execs can't be telling the organization in a lean portfolio session that this is the priority, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, there's a different priority for my guys. There's one share price, there's one organization, and we need to drive behavior accordingly. So in 2023, we started doing portfolio synchronization sessions, and this is where we have every single product owner and delivery manager and business owner on a call or in a session where we synchronize how are you doing what you're doing. Where are you? What are your blockers? And these happen on a monthly basis in between big room planning sessions. So we don't need to wait for an event, a big room planning session for us to highlight that we've got contention, that we've got resource issues, and that there's some discrepancies. We do it on a monthly basis. So we understand on a monthly basis where people are struggling and what their challenges are. And what that's led to is that we now have a couple of significant things that happen on a monthly basis. So on a monthly basis, we have divisional syncs, and this is where the divisions speak about their backlog. They tell us about things that they're bringing into the funnel. We help guide them and support them to make sure that the things they're bringing in are compelling, meet certain criteria, have met standards from various other stakeholders in the organization. And so we help them to craft nifty cases that can be challenged. We then have portfolio syncs, whereas the portfolio leaders, we sit with the entire product owner and delivery manager capability, and we ask them, where are you? So consider it like a big stand-up. Where are you? What are you challenged with? How can we help you? And do you have a dependency of someone on this call that has promised you something and hasn't delivered? And it's about making not just the work visible, but the conversation transparent. And I want that thought to just think in, because making work visible is one aspect. But having transparent conversations that support visibility is really, really important. And there's a level of maturity that needs to accompany that kind of thinking and understanding. So we're not, by no means, don't get me wrong. This is not a perfect, slick machine that's greased wheels and running perfectly. But if we reflect on where we've come, we've certainly done a significant amount of work in this area. So some of the milestones, I mean, in 2019, I think with the support of Reneshan and Bias, we did our first LPM. And I can say shit, so it was a shit show. Everybody, well, no, you weren't shit. It was a shit show. Yeah. We had to sequence, as I said, 265 things. People were stumbling over their feet. There was no rhythm. There was no cadence. There was no, if this was an orchestra, somebody at the back there was, tuning their violin while somebody in the front here was singing and is meant to be in an orchestra. It was just like deur mekaar. And what that taught us was bite-sized pieces. Let's get to bite-sized pieces. 265 things is not going to work. And so we went into 2020 where we then said, well, we took it to the leaders and said 260 things are certainly not palatable. Leadership, as they would, came back and said, okay, we'll do 160. That was a neat compromise. And we tried our best to accommodate them, knowing that we're going to fail. And sometimes that's also a lesson, is that sometimes you have to do things even though you know you're not going to succeed. You know you're going to fall apart. You know it's not going to happen, but you need to prove a point, or you need to experiment. And I cannot stress enough that everything we do on a daily basis is literally experimenting. I read a meme the other day that said, every single parent out there, even if they're 80 years old, is winging it, because they've never been a parent before. And that's kind of it. It's every day, there's a new challenge, there's a new obstacle, and we just have to wing it and try and figure out a way around it, but not wing it at the risk of organizational strategy, or at the risk of losing money, or at the risk of people and their wellness and their sanity. We need to be cognizant of all of those things. So in 2020, we learned quite a bit, which then allowed us to have proper divisional sync sessions in 2021. Somebody messed up the dates there, I'm not sure. Bias? I'm just saying. Okay, so it's 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, right? So in 2020, we did divisional syncs, and we made our work visible at a portfolio level. And you'll notice that in all of this, I didn't mention the exco once. I didn't mention management once. I didn't mention senior leadership once. Because they're not an exclusive bunch. They have to journey this with us. They can't instruct us, because the board holds them accountable, so they have to journey this with us. They can't be the ones who sit at the back and say, don't forget about my work item, please make sure it's on the list. No, they have to stand in the trenches with us and make sure that they are capable of defending the piece of work that they want the rest of the organization to do, that they can stand and be accountable for that piece of work, successful or not. And so leadership are part of this journey. And so what we've done is we've relegated conversations with our exco team to a quarterly conversation. And essentially in that quarterly conversation, we tell them how the portfolio is behaving, what is happening, what have we delivered, what are the challenges, and how are we looking from a financial perspective. We also give them an opportunity to bring in new entrants. So this is their opportunity to say, I've got something cool that I want to introduce. But it's not an and conversation, it's an or conversation. And so we've changed the rhetoric to say, if you want to bring this in, what do you want us to stop? If you want us to do this, what do you want us to pause? Okay? And those are the conversations that leaders need to be accustomed to. Because when they get into the and conversation, we're all going to go bless like Bias. All right, so that was a really pivotal moment for us, is to bring our leadership on board to understand the or conversation in an exco planning session. And then finally, we've spoken about big room planning. We've actually just had one last week. We do this to bring the organization together, to understand what is the imperative, and to understand how we're going to take this forward. But most importantly, it's done with the blessing of them understanding that the exco has leaned in and given direction. And I think that's the important part, is that when somebody down there smacking a keyboard understands that this instruction or this piece of work is supported by their leadership and has been sequenced by their leadership, your end result is pretty straightforward. You've got some choreography. You've got people who are lined up to dance in a particular way. You've got people who can play the instruments at the right time, to the right tune, with the right cadence, to do what needs to be done. I see Kobus is getting a bit angsty because he sees there's 3 minutes left here. So I'll pause there and thank you all. If there are any questions, concerns, now's your chance also for a standing ovation if you'd like. Yeah, I'll pause there. Cool.
Questions?
Yeah, we've got one down here and one up there.
Thank you. I'm interested to understand your self-service portal for, I'm assuming it was LPM demand.
Yeah.
Was that something you built or bought, and how does it work?
So essentially our self-service portal is a home-built portal, and it's really, to make it sound sexy, it's Power BI, right? And essentially it sits on SharePoint, and it's a form. And so everybody gets to complete a form, but it integrates into a board, into several boards. And essentially what that happens is we've got a downstream and an upstream Kanban kind of thinking in our organization. So downstream Kanban is all of the stuff that happens operationally. Those are the projects that run. And then we have an upstream Kanban that manages this portal. And so when we have our divisional syncs, it's a really easy place to go to. We go to one source of the truth. And for all of those sport fanatics out there, our exco have coined the phrase, if it's not on a portal, it doesn't exist. So if it's not on Strava, you never did it, right? And that's essentially how we operate. So if nobody's logged anything on the portal, we're not going to talk about it. It doesn't exist. If nobody's done the supporting work on the portal, i.e. gone through the commercials, looked at technical reviews, looked at the architectural intent, we're not going to talk about it. So if it's not there, it doesn't exist, but it's a homegrown application. Cool.
Ek? All right. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's very insightful. I wanted to check how you managed to get over 80 people on the same vision for LPM, because obviously you had an LPM vision initially. And the second question would be, are some of the divisions independent or able to run independently? And if so, were they also forced to come into LPM for approval of their initiatives, etc.?
Okay, good question. So the first is we didn't align 80 people, we aligned 600 people. And so that's the important part, is that 80 people are people who are physically involved in leading the initiatives, but 600 people need to buy into the vision. So the whole organization is to buy into why are we doing this, what are we doing, and how are we doing things. And that's the important part. Second question is really cool because We do have areas that have their own sort of ring-fenced feature teams, but there are dependencies on those feature teams. So they too need to come to LPM, and they too need to sequence their work, but we ring-fence them to themselves. If there are dependencies on them, we need to make sure that those dependencies are visible. If there is a dependency on or of them, we need to make sure that the teams who need them understand what they're busy with so that they need to come in. So they're not automatically excluded, and we don't have a cool kids club and special boys and girls that don't need to come. Everyone comes, everyone attends. At the pain, even our cybersecurity team needs to attend, and I get complaints about that all the time. But every single team that contributes to building some solution needs to attend the LPM sessions.
Cool. One more question.
There's no mic, so scream.
And while we're getting the mic there...
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Jump.
So, absolutely, trying to make sure that you can prioritize and it's what drops out when something new comes in. The other side of that is from a finance perspective. How did you manage to get that right with budgets? So you've now applied for funding and it's for a particular functionality. That's now superseded. Something else comes in. How do you get that right?
So essentially, we do one of two things. We will replace something with another item, depending on the budget, obviously. But where there are significant budget constraints, we need to understand if you want to do something that's more compelling than what we're currently doing, but it costs more. We don't have any more money. You need to understand what is the MVP you're going to produce with the funds that's available to you. So we need to see value in terms of what you are going to be producing. So if you're asking for 4 million, but there's only 2 million available, we're going to tell you, let's see what your 2 million can do. Because we don't have any more money for you, right? We can't, mid-financial cycles, we can't just scratch out more money. But we need to understand what is the value you're bringing in order for us to make that call on replacing items or not. I hope that answers your question. Cool.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you.